This episode of Spectra Creative is brought to you by The Fork. When eating, if you need to pick something up and put it in your mouth, choose the fork. Funko Pops, or Pops from Funko, however you want to say it. They're everywhere. They're on everybody's desk, they're in everybody's toy collection, they're all over stores. The big question, though, is why? What is the appeal of these black-eyed, squishy little versions of characters that has become so addicting to pop culture of the last decade? I mean, I own several Pops, and many people own hundreds, if not thousands, of Pops. You can find Pops in all sorts of licenses. Well, to really understand this, it's important to look at the emotional connection that Pops have and the competitive advantages they have and how Funko has been able to take advantage of this. There's a lot of videos online about the history of Funko or, new and upcoming Pop figures, but I really want to dive into the unique emotional connection. So, first off, they're easy to find. And that's a big part of it too. Yes, there's definitely treasure hunt versions, and there's versions for conventions that are in limited number, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But the fact that you could basically walk into almost any toy store, but not just toy stores, music stores and bookstores and even gas stations, tourist shops, Pops have been able to integrate into big box stores. They're in mom and pop shops. They have a very omnipresent presence, an omnipresent presence. Yeah, that sounded great. My English teacher is going to be so proud of me as my English gets much more better every video. The point is, Pops are all over. And to understand the emotional connection, we have to first go back to where this came from, which is Japan. So Japan has a huge collector base for vinyl. Vinyl has had, no, not this kind of vinyl, vinyl figures, which is what Pops are really based on. The idea of doing sort of what are called super deformed or squishy versions of characters. And there hasn't really been too much consistency in Japan. They're all over the map. They have bigger ones, smaller ones. There's tons of companies that make these, and they've been popular in Japan for decades. Well, recognizing this trend in toys, the first big American toy company to recognize the ongoing trend and, how popular this is in Japan, and that it is basically one of the best-selling form factors in Japan, was Hasbro. And they decided that they were going to bring this form factor to the US in the form of Mighty Mugs. You guys remember these, the Mighty Mugs? They're actually now like 10, 15 years old. I'm not talking about the new ones with the face changer. That's a whole other YouTube video. But the original Mighty Mugs were directly modeled after the Japanese vinyl trend. And Hasbro took advantage of this in a great way, realizing that one single tool, like a basic body that didn't need to change that much, could be repainted for almost unlimited number of characters, which from a toy making perspective is fantastic, because tooling is the most expensive investment in the toy making process. It's where basically the bulk of the money has to be spent. So if you have one tool and you can repaint that for virtually unlimited characters, well, you're really set up for success from a manufacturing standpoint. For Hasbro, though, the one sort of chink in the armor was the fact that while the Mighty Mugs were really fun and very popular, they were limited to the number of licenses and IP that they currently had. They weren't really equipped to go after other smaller licenses just to apply them to Mighty Mugs. It was more, well, we have Marvel, and we have Star Wars, and we have Transformers, so we can make Mighty Mugs of these characters. Now, luckily, many of the IPs that are in Hasbro's, treasure trove, or, their portfolio, were very deep. And even some of the new ones they got, like Indiana Jones, also had a huge existing audience. So they really didn't need to go after too many licenses because they had, their own stuff like Transformers and G.I. Joe, and between Marvel and Star Wars, those are two of the most popular IPs in the entire licensing industry. And they really took advantage of the form factor, doing everything from exclusives to convention items to regular retail. And they created this little square white box that became very universal for the Mighty Mugs with the cutout on the right side. Obviously, some figures needed some unique tooling. This is one of my favorites, and actually one of the only Mighty Mugs I still have. But for the most part, they could do them all without tooling. Mattel tried to jump on this bandwagon too with an item called Additubes, taking more of a tube shape to the Japanese trend. We put these out at San Diego Comic-Con one year, but because there was an overwhelming fan interest, Mattel quickly gave this the boot. I was definitely in the boat that, well, yeah, you kind of have to tool them up and sell them first, but without that huge, overwhelming interest right out the gate for things like Major Matt Mason, Mad Scientist, Masters of the Universe, different Mattel IP, well, Mattel quickly canned this idea for the Additubes, and it never went to market. Only a few prototypes exist and kind of go for big bucks now whenever they show up on eBay. Well, Hasbro essentially, after about 7 years of doing this, realized we're done. We've done everything we can. They've done every Star Wars figure, every Marvel figure, every G.I. Joe. I mean, not every G.I. Joe, but they did a lot, and they kind of exhausted their character selection from the IP that they owned and the IP that they licensed. Well, along comes Mike Becker, who went on to found Funko. And I'm not going to turn this whole video into a history of Funko. There's plenty of videos online that do that. But I do want to touch on some very early parts of Funko's history because it plays up into their competitive advantages and the emotional connection to Funkos, which is the point of this video. So Funko as a company started off with one SKU, a Big Boy bobblehead. If you're not familiar with Big Boy or Bob's Big Boy, this was the mascot for a burger restaurant that it's not really a chain. I think they had like 5 to 7 locations around Southern California, their original one being in Burbank there. And this character, who is their mascot, who's been around for decades, has kind of become a beloved part of California culture. He's kind of a cultural icon, especially because there's usually a giant statue of him outside of the restaurants. And people like to pose and take pictures with him, and it's kind of like a tourist thing, like going to the Grand Canyon. Well, when Mike had the bobbleheads, he went to Universal City Walk, which is the shopping center that is outside of Universal Studios in Hollywood, in California. And he went to one of the collector stores that they have there. They have a couple, and brought them a case of Big Boy bobbleheads and gave it to the store owner and said, look, I'm not going to charge you for this. Take this case, see if you could sell it. And if you can, here's my number, you can call. Well, they sold out in a day, and Mike quickly had orders for reorder. But the whole free sample sort of trial and error tactic he took was a huge part of this bobblehead success. Once they sold out from one free case, it was pretty easy to get reorders. So, after the bobblehead, now that he had some funding from sales of it, he was able to create his own form factor, which at first he called the Funko 2.0, the Funko Force 2.0, which again, stylized vinyl figure right there on the package. Originally in blister cards with a topper where you could see the figure inside of kind of a sort of a half egg-shaped blister card. But it wasn't long before these became the Funkos we know and renamed from Funko Force 2.0 to Funko Pops, which have now gone on to be this cultural phenomenon in so many different licenses. So let's kind of jump in and talk about why people collect these. What is the appeal of these, these irisless, black-eyed, detailless, non-articulated characters that have dominated our desks and our toy shelves for, a little over a decade now. So obviously the fact that they can have a huge character selection is part of that. And it's not just characters that we have in action figure form or other merchandise. While that's been kind of the first tactic they went for, is going after licenses that had an existing fan base, And I mean, obviously you can get Darth Maul in any number of form factors, from a Pez dispenser to a 12-inch figure to, little mini figures that ride around in vehicles that is on shelf at Target and Walmart now. But doing him in this new form factor helped to establish it. Then, beyond the form factors that had major fan bases, Funko is able to go after brands that, well, really didn't have presence in the toy aisle, or more so in the toy collection previously. Things like TV shows or movies that weren't really toyetic movies but had big fan bases, like Titanic. I mean, you're not going to make Titanic action figures with real drowning action, as well as sitcoms and cult shows, especially from the 80s, where you just don't have other merchandise that exists to support these. And of course, movies and iconic toyetic properties were still going to be targeted because, well, even if you already have an action figure, although it took decades to get an action figure of Ian Malcolm, well, it could still be part of Funko. And that's because of their whole positioning, that everyone is a fan of something. And honestly, this is brilliant, and it really sums up what they're all about and what their appeal is. So part of it has been their ability to create chase figures and to create the collectible demand by only having certain figures at certain retailers. I mean, if you go to San Diego Comic-Con, their entire booth is just a line. They basically barely have anything on display that's new. It's just a sales booth, with no new product out. So what are their strengths? What is it that's so unique about Funko Pops that creates a unique emotional connection? That is truly the key to their success and what makes them different from really any other property at market right now. So first off, it's the universal look. It's that everything, no matter what it is, no matter what property, is all in the same size and is scaled to each other. And that's so important to adult collectors, is scale. They want all their figures to work in one line. Even 6-inch figures often have differentiation, where some are a little taller, some are a little shorter. Being able to have everything work together and live together in one, call it Funko Pop world, is so appealing to the adult collector because it feels natural. It feels like things fit. And because of the huge variety of characters, well, you could put anything into this form factor. They're also have the competitive advantage of being able to do very limited number of items because they're a much smaller company with much smaller overhead. So repainting a figure and doing a tiny amount is a huge advantage. And then finally, and probably one of their biggest advantages, is they don't have to deal with likeness rights. So while an action figure, which has a portrait sculpt for its head to look like an actor, well, the Funko Pops don't need to look like the actor. They just have dark black eyes and then, details for the outfit. So what this allows is easy tooling, low-cost tooling, and the emotional connection for the consumer is they can create a shelf that is literally customized to them. Meaning they can, because there's so many characters offered in this form factor that is universal through every single IP, at your desk, at work, on your toy shelf, wherever it is that you choose to put your Funko Pops, you can literally create a toy shelf that is 100% customized to exactly what you like. And you can find characters that represent IP that is basically not available in any other toyetic form factor or any other way that toys are offered, because they go so deep, not only in character selection with major properties like Star Wars and Marvel and DC, but with all of the obscure ones, the TV shows, the one and done kind of things. So with that, quickly in my opinion, I'm going to offer some properties that, hey, Funko should probably go after. So Brian, if you're listening, hey, you can always get a hold of me through spectrecreative.com. Here's a couple properties I'd love to see done as Funko Pops. Valerian. No, not to be confused with the steel from Game of Thrones, and not to be confused with the movie. Not that the movie wasn't, I liked it a lot more than most. But the comic book is huge in Europe, like Star Wars huge. In fact, it basically is Star Wars. And doing Pops based on the original comic book would be huge. Another one, Airplane. The reason Airplane can't work for action figures is because the likeness rights are not tied to the property rights. If you have the rights to the Airplane property, you still have to get the rights to all of the individual actors. But because of the competitive advantage of Funko, with that there are no likeness rights, this is one of those cult properties that would be perfect for the Funko Pop form factor. Next up, the Image universe. Yeah, it's not all tied together and there's not continuity necessarily between, but characters like Spawn, Savage Dragon, Shadowhawk, Witchblade, they would be great. We have Marvel and DC. Why can't we have Image? I would love to have characters from the Image universe in Pop so that they can join the other ones I have as a customized display of my favorite things. Something only Funko Pop can do, and one of their competitive advantages. Having everything in that same form factor is really what appeals to the adult collector. So bring on the Image characters. All right, next up, Parker Brothers games. You're probably thinking, wait, how do you make games into Pops? Well, there's a lot of cool characters in Parker Brothers that have been around for decades and are beloved in pop culture. Things like Rich Uncle Pennybags, or I would love the Clue characters. How awesome would a Colonel Mustard be in pop form factor? It would be great, and there's lots of art and lots of reference from them through the decades to really make this come alive. And hey, while you're at it, why not make Clue the movie? Another property that's never really had merchandise, but is huge as far as a cult fan. And a cult movie that, well, I'm a huge fan of is Hudson Hawk. It never really gets the fair due I think that it deserves. It really is an awesome movie that gets better with age, even though when I tried to show it to my wife while we were dating, she made me shut it off. I think it's the only movie she ever made me shut off, but and questioned how I could like this. But come on, it's an awesome movie. I mean, how great would the candy bar CIA agents and different versions of Hudson Hawk be with in different poses, doing Ig and Ook as a 2-pack. It really needs toys, and Funko Pop, because of the low tooling and the lack of likeness, you could easily do Hudson Hawk holding his cappuccino and smiling there on your desk with all of the rest of your Marvel, DC, and Disney Pops. Hey, you could even do Leonardo da Vinci from it, even though, you could just do him as a historical character. But who doesn't want him with those cool glasses holding gold bars from his machine? Finally, fraternities and sororities. All right, Brian, if you're listening up, this is a huge untapped market for toys, and Funko Pops would be the perfect form factor. The people in college that go Greek, and I was one of them, go AE Pi, are hugely passionate about their house and their letters, and they love to display them. And being able to get a Funko Pop with their letters on sort of like the t-shirt, well, this would be huge and so easy to do. There's an existing retail structure between college bookstores and dedicated Greek shops that would do huge business selling college fraternity and sorority pops with different hair colors, different skin tones. Super easy to do. Make it happen. I'd love it. So those were my ideas. What are yours? What properties should Funko do that they have not gotten to? I'd love to hear that in the comments below, and I'll always answer you. If you like this video and you'd like to see more like it, please do subscribe and give it a like for no other reason than it tells YouTube to share it with other people. And that's the whole point. Share toy love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.